and welcome to another video from Language Professora. I said hola, which means it's all about Spanish. Let's get into it. So we have been looking at syllabification, pronouncing our words. How do we break them up in order to better pronounce them? This is part 3 of our 4-part series. In part 1, we looked at our vowels being broken apart. We had 4 rules. In rule 1, when we had our strong plus our strong vowel, they had to go their separate ways. In rule 2, when we had strong plus weak, stay together. Weak plus strong, stay together. Weak plus weak, stay together. That was our vowels. Then we look at our consonants. And with our consonants, there were also 4 rules for breaking them into syllables. Rule 1 said that when you have 2 consonants coming together, the first goes with the vowel before, the second goes with the vowel after. Rule 2 was an exception to that, where it said when that second consonant is L or R, they stay together, you don't separate them. Then rule 3 said, when you have 3 consonants coming together, numbers 1 and 2 go with the vowel before, and number 3 goes with the vowel after. However, rule 4 was again an exception to rule 3, where it said, when that third consonant is L or R, you don't separate it from number 2. So it ends up being number 1 goes with the vowel before, and numbers 2 and 3 go with the vowel after. So that was part 1 and part 2 in a nutshell. Now we're looking at part 3. Part 3 is going to be all about rules of stress. Still on the main topic of syllabification, which is just a big word for how you break your words into syllables. Now, when it comes down to rules of stress, what happens when you're breaking your words into syllables? It's similar to what happens in English, where whether or not you want to believe it, when we are pronouncing our words, there are particular syllables that we would emphasize over the others. And the same thing happens in Spanish. So rules of stress speaks to that in particular. So we have 3 things that we're going to be looking at. Number 1, A, E, I, O, U, S, N. Those are 7 letters that we're going to be looking out for. So rule 1 for rules of stress says, when the word ends with any of those 7, any of these 7 letters, you put the stress on the second to last syllable. And let's look at an example using one of the words that we would have had in one of the parts that we did before, parts 1 or part 2. So we're going to use this word, apprenden. And I hope you remember how we broke this into parts, where we had both rule 1 and rule 2 coming into effect in this word. So the rule that we're now looking for is, we're looking for these 7 letters, any of these 7 letters being at the end of a particular word. So the first thing we do is this. Okay, we see N. N is one of the 7 letters. There it is right there. So the rule says it ends with any of those 7, then you're going to stress the second to last. So this is your last syllable. Your second to last would be the syllable that comes immediately before the last syllable. So here is your second to last syllable. So when you're pronouncing this word, you're going to be putting an extra stress, an extra emphasis, an extra oomph, an extra sound on the pren. So you hear aprenden, aprenden, aprenden. That is how that sounds. No, we're not going to belabor this point, right? Very easy, straightforward and to the point. Rule 2 simply says, and this is my paraphrasing of it, when the word does not end with, and I'm going to rewrite them just for emphasis, A, E, I, O, U, S, N. It doesn't end with those 7. Stress the last syllable. And let's look at an example here. I'm going to tell you this much. Well, not even most, all of our verbs are going to fall into this category because our verbs don't end with any of, our verbs in the infinitive, that is, they don't end with any of these 7 letters. So automatically verbs are going to be stressing the last syllable. So we have that word hablar. Okay, let's look at it, right? We have 2 consonants here. And if we go back to our consonant rules, this second consonant is an L, which is one of our 2 letters. It means that these 2 stay together. So our break for this word is going to come right there. So this word becomes H-A-B-L-A-R. But we want to identify where to put the stress. And this is how this now plays out. When you look at the last letter, that is what gives you the clue. If this last letter is not one of these 7, then the stress falls on your last syllable. So to pronounce this word, it would be hablar, 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 with an emphasis on that blar. That's how it's going to be. So I think this rule or this category is pretty straightforward, pretty easy, pretty simple to navigate. There's only one other thing that I want to point out, because what you're going to find happening is that you're going to have cases where the word ends with A-E-I-O-U-S-N, and the stress is not on that second to last syllable. It could be on the last, it could be on another syllable, but it's not on that syllable in particular. And you're going to also have cases where the word does not end with A-E-I-O-U-S-N, and the stress is not on the last syllable. So here is what happens. Whenever the stress is moved from where you want it, or let me not say from where you want it to be, whenever the stress is moved from where the rule says it should be, look at what happens. An accent is used to indicate the change. And I'm going to give you an example using a word that is going to be carrying an accent. So let's look at the word Production. Now, production has an accent. Let's look at why it has an accent. What would get production looking like this with an accent, right? Let's label. So we have consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel, vowel, consonant. All right? We're going to be going through some of these in terms of, in part 4, we're going to be looking at just some examples in breaking down the words where I'm going to be going a lot slower. We're going to be incorporating as many of the rules for vowels, consonants, and rules of stress as we possibly can. Okay, we're going to be breaking it down in part 4, so you can't afford to miss part 4. We wrap it all up in part 4. But let's look at this. So here we have or R not being separated from our P because we know what that rule says. And then we have or C, and then we have 2 vowels there. Now let's look at the vowels. We have I being a weak, O being a strong, so we know that they're going to be staying together. Okay? Then we have our 2 consonants. The second one is not L or R, so it means that this one goes that way, that one goes that way. So we separate it there. So pro, duc, remember that first C sounds like a K, second one sounds like an S. Production. So when we rewrite this, production, we have it like that, right? We check the end of the word and we see N. This is our last syllable. So we're now looking for our second to last syllable. So by right, we should be stressing over here. We should be saying production, production. We should be putting the stress on the duc. But what do we see happening here? What it says is this. I know that I should be stressing the duc, but I don't want production. I want production, production. So what the accent does is it indicates the moving of the stress from where it should be to where you want it to be. And that is how we end up with accents. Now, this is just one of the many ways in which accents are used, especially when it comes down to pronunciation. There are many other ways which we will delve into when we go deeper into the language and deeper into the channel. But for the basics for right now, this is how it is. So let's recap rules of stress. Rule 1, A, E, I, O, U, S, N. Once you see your word ending with any of those 7 letters, you stress the second to last syllable. We would have seen how to break our words into syllables from our vowels and our consonants, parts 1 and part 2. When the word does not end with A, E, I, O, U, S, N, we stress the last syllable. That is rule 2 for rules of stress. And finally, whenever you have a deviation from rule 1 or rule 2, where you don't want the second to last being stressed, or you don't want the last to be stressed based on how it should be, you use an accent to indicate where that change would be. And there you have it. Parts 1, vowels, part 2, consonants, and part 3, rules of stress, wrapped up nicely and neatly. It's on to part 4, and part 4 is where we bring everything together. You can't afford to miss it. So for now, enjoy this video, watch it as many times as you want to make sure you get the concept cemented, and adios.